Welcome to this presentation on the Biannual Transparency Report of the Netherlands. Before we go into more details on our policies and targets, it is good to look at where we are coming from in terms of emissions trends. This slide shows the 1990 to 2023 sectoral emission trends, according to our latest National Inventory Report from 2025. In 2023, total GHG emissions, including indirect CO2 emissions and emissions from land use change and forestry, were estimated at 146.4 megaton CO2 equivalent. This is 35.6% below 1990, when emissions stood at 227.5 megaton equivalent. Over the same period, the economy grew by more than 90%. The energy sector is by far the largest contributor to CO2 emissions in the Netherlands and has seen a 30% decrease in CO2 emissions by 2023 compared to 1990. Drivers for these reductions were improvements in energy efficiency by end users, switching to more efficient fuels in the power sector, and increasing the production of renewable energy. While 2022 and 2023 saw further reduced gaseous fuel consumption due to high energy prices at the time. As part of the EU, our climate target is set in the EU climate law, a binding legal framework. This law stipulates that the EU must reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 level, and that the EU must reach net zero emissions by 2050. These targets cover emissions and removals that are regulated in union law. We have a joint EU NDC. The EU NDC sets a joint economy-wide absolute emission reduction target in net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% in 2030 compared to 1990. The target is to be achieved in the EU without the use of international credits. It includes net removals from the LULUCF sector and emissions from international aviation and maritime transport activities, which fall under the EU emissions trading system, the ETS. EU-wide emissions reductions are regulated through three main sectoral instruments. Firstly, the European Emissions Trading System, the ETS. It is the cornerstone of the European Climate and Energy Framework. It sets an EU-wide cap on the maximum number of emissions allowances in the energy and industrial sectors and for specific flights and trips in aviation and maritime transport. Emission allowances are not allocated to individual member states but can be traded throughout the EU. The cap is set as at 62% emission reduction in 2030 relative to 2005. The second policy element is for sectors outside of the ETS, such as domestic transport, buildings, and agriculture. This is the effort sharing regulation. It sets binding emissions reductions target at member state, so national level. Collectively, this results in a reduction of 40% in 2030 relative to 2005. The effort sharing is based on, amongst others, greenhouse gas emission intensity and GDP per capita. Reduction targets for individual member states range from 10 to 50%. Thirdly, for LULUCF emissions, there is an EU-wide net carbon removal target of 310 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. Similar to the effort-sharing regulation, each member state has an individually binding target which, taken together, form the EU's collective target. We now turn towards how the Netherlands, as an EU member state, contributes to these targets and fulfills its commitments. Under the effort-sharing regulation, the Netherlands has a binding target of 48% reduction for sectors that do not fall under the EU ETS. This is one of the highest ESR targets within the EU. The targets are translated into cumulative budgets for the period of 2021 to 2030, based on specified annual emission allocations. For the Netherlands, this amounts to 830 megatons of CO2. Under the LULUCF regulation, finally, the Netherlands has to achieve an additional reduction of 0.435 megatons by 2030 compared to the reference period. That is the average of 2016 to 2018. The National Climate Policy Framework ensures that the Netherlands delivers its contributions to the EU targets. The National Climate Act, adopted in 2019 and amended in 2023, provides the legal basis for our national climate policies. It includes provisions on monitoring and evaluation. After the amendment to align the Act with the new European legal framework, our targets are a national 55% reduction by 2030 compared to 1990, and reaching net zero emissions by 2050 to achieve negative emissions thereafter. In 2022 and 2023, new policies were introduced to help meet these targets. We now list a few key policy areas. First, a rapid increase of carbon-free energy production. We have one of the highest per capita solar capacities in Europe, mostly driven by subsidies for rooftop solar and farms and net metering for house owners. Offshore wind capacity has increased rapidly in recent years, reaching 4.7 gigawatts. It almost doubled in 2024 compared to 2022. The aim is to have 21 gigawatts by 2030. Success factors here are integrated spatial planning, providing infrastructure, and a cost-effective tendering approach. The Netherlands also stimulates the production of green hydrogen using renewable energy to replace grey hydrogen that is currently used in industry. Several large-scale electrolyzers are in preparation, which should result in 3 to 4 gigawatt in 2030. 4 new nuclear plants are also foreseen, with planning preparation having started for the first 2. A second key policy area is the phase-out of coal and ultimately all fossil fuels in the energy mix. Several inefficient coal power plants were already close to meet 2020 targets. The Coal Prohibition Act will prohibit any further use of coal for electricity production from 2030 onwards. Next to coal, we are working on phasing out natural gas. In 2023, after 60 years, the Netherlands has ended the exploitation of the Groningen gas field, even though the field is not yet depleted. There are strong incentives to reduce natural gas consumption by end users, most notably by households and industry. For buildings, we have integrated programs that use a mix of policy measures to improve both energy performance and phase out of natural gas. For industry, we have tailor-made agreements to stimulate investments in CO2-free technologies. Also, businesses are required to implement energy savings in combination with reporting obligations, and there are various instruments to stimulate investments in more energy-efficient techniques and equipment. A third focus area is efficient and zero-emission mobility. We have a long-standing and successful fiscal regime based on energy efficiency and CO2 performance. This has resulted in one of the highest adoption rates of electric vehicles within the European Union. In 2024, more than a third of all new car sales were electric vehicles. Now, how do we keep track? Active monitoring of progress and the evaluation of expected impacts is crucial to know whether we are on track and where we may need to adjust. The National Climate Act therefore also requires monitoring and evaluation. Our policy cycle is as follows. The Climate Plan sets the policies to be implemented. Implementation of policies is monitored by agencies. Data is collected in a dashboard on climate policies. The Climate and Energy Outlook is made by an independent public agency, and it assesses the progress and the expected impact of climate policies in reaching our climate and energy targets. Each year, the government informs and discusses with Parliament on the progress and expectations. After a political debate, the government announces new policies or adjustments in spring, which take into consideration the findings from the Climate and Energy Outlook, as well as subsequent political debate. And the cycle starts again. Now it's time to look ahead. Where do these policies take us? As explained in the previous slide, the yearly Climate and Energy Outlook assesses the progress and the expected impact of climate policies to reach our targets. These projections are made by an independent public agency, the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, or PBL. The findings of the Climate and Energy Outlook are included in the Climate Policy Note, which is sent to the Parliament and plays an important part in political deliberation. We want to share here a few key messages from the latest projection results. The projections in the BTR were based on the outlook from 2024, which included policies up to May 2024. Recently, the Outlook 2025 was published with more recent information. The figure here shows the projections for the target year 2030. Based on current projections, total reductions by 2030 are estimated to be between 46.8 and 54.5%. That means that the target of 55% just falls outside of the bandwidth of the estimation when including additional and scheduled policy measures. It should also be noted that such a scenario is dependent on policies fully materializing their impact and relatively favorable external developments. Taken together with the previously mentioned monitoring and evaluation cycle, this should help ensure that our climate targets are within reach. Please note that this all concerns our national targets. The policies that we have in place are expected to fulfill our contributions to the EU targets for the non-ETS sectors and, to a large extent, also for the LULUCF sector. We now turn to the support that the Netherlands has provided. Our support for climate action in developing countries has been an integral part of our international cooperation for more than a decade. The Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation is responsible for programming and planning of climate finance, including support to capacity building and technology transfer. As this figure shows, except for a dip in 2020 related to COVID, climate finance from the Netherlands has had an upward trend since 2014. It includes both public and mobilized private climate finance. Our public climate finance is primarily grant-based, and we dedicate more than 60% to adaptation, targeting people who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In response to the questions raised by the Republic of Korea, this focus was possible by steering the allocation of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. As the figure shows, the contribution of private climate finance is increasingly important. The Netherlands mobilizes private climate finance to specific policy instruments, such as the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. In conclusion, we hope that our presentation has made clear that the Netherlands is firmly committed to the Paris Agreement and a reliable partner in implementation. We are strongly committed to achieving our ambitious climate targets. Adjustments are made when and where needed to meet these targets. The necessary national and European framework is in place, and within the EU, we are progressing towards our joint 2030 NDC target of 55% net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The Netherlands has already achieved a 35.6% reduction in national emissions compared to 1990, all the while maintaining an increasing population and growing economy. Our national policies are also expected to fulfill our contributions to the EU sectoral climate targets for the non-ETS sectors and, to a large extent, the LULUCF sector. Only for our more ambitious national target of 55% reduction in 2030, current policies are estimated to fall just outside the bandwidth of the estimation. For this, adjustments are being made. Despite recent budget cuts in development cooperation at large, the Netherlands remains firmly committed to delivering financial support for climate action in developing countries. With this, we end our presentation, and we are very happy to answer your questions.